Hello, it's Wednesday, October 25th, 2017. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO Headline News. Here's Earth sky for tonight. They advise moon gazing tonight. Think of Pluto, too. Oh, Pluto, little dwarf planet, demoted from full planethood. Perhaps, at least for the time being. Here's what Bruce McClure offers in the night sky for tonight. Tonight and tomorrow night as well. The rather wide waxing crescent moon shines fairly close on the sky's dome. It's close to dwarf planet Pluto. Both are in front of the constellation Sagittarius the Archer. Just don't expect to see Pluto, which is about 1,600 times fainter than the dimmest star visible to the eye on a dark, moonless night. In fact, you probably would need at least a 14-inch or larger telescope and a sky chart as well to spot this distant world. But you can take this opportunity to think about Pluto. The Pluto Ponder. Pluto's one of our solar system's most fascinating worlds. Here's the plan. Stand outside. Use the moon to get an idea of Pluto's place in front of the starry heavens. Some people are familiar with the famous teapot asterism, that star pattern in the western Sagittarius area. Pluto is found to the northeast of the teapot at the moment, fairly close to the third magnitude star Albaldha. That's spelled Albaldha, also known as Pi Sagittarii. And then think about Pluto's awesome history in terms of our human understanding of the cosmos. In 1930, astronomers hailed Pluto as a new planet in our solar system. That was before we knew the outer solar system contains many small objects, sometimes called trans-Neptunian objects, of which several hundred are currently numbered and several thousand are known but remain unnumbered. Pluto is the largest so far. This increasing number of known objects in the outer solar system is one reason why, in 2006, the International Astronomical Union relegated Pluto to dwarf planet status. Pluto wasn't denied planetary status because it's not massive enough to be a planet, by the way. Pluto, in and of itself, has sufficient mass to qualify. Rather, Pluto was reclassified by that International Astronomical Union because this world doesn't have sufficient heft to, quote, clear the neighborhood around its orbit, end quotes. This great article also includes a link to a fantastic black and white photograph of a starry-eyed Clyde W. Tombaugh at his family's farm with that homemade telescope. The shot was taken in 1928, 2 years before he discovered Pluto in 1930. Here's just a little bit about Clyde W. Tombaugh. And, there are UFOs involved. This is an article from UFOsightingsdaily.com. Headline, Let's Celebrate Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto and saw 6 UFOs over Las Cruces, New Mexico on August 20th, 1949. Clyde William Tombaugh, born February 4th, 1906, he died January 17th, 1997. He was an American astronomer. And that object, Pluto, his discovery in 1930, that was the first object to be discovered in what would later be called the Kuiper Belt. His ashes are now in space aboard that spacecraft. So here's a tidbit of news about Clyde, something that the author of this article says we won't see in the news. It's his UFO sighting. Here's what Scott C. Waring writes. Clyde W. Tombaugh was probably the preeminent astronomer to have reported seeing unidentified flying objects. On August 20th, 1949, Tombaugh saw several UFOs near Las Cruces, New Mexico. He described them as 6 to 8 rectangular lights. Here's his statement. Quote, I doubt that the phenomena has any terrestrial reflection because nothing of the kind has ever appeared before or since. I was so unprepared for such a strange sight that I was really petrified with astonishment. End quotes. A similar shocked response has been reported many times by others who claim to have seen mysterious aerial objects. Tombaugh was also later to report having seen 3 of the mysterious green fireballs. Green fireballs which suddenly appeared over New Mexico in late 1948 and continued at least through the early 1950s. In 1956, Tombaugh had the following to say about his various sightings. Quote, "I have seen 3 objects in the last 7 years which defied any explanation of known phenomenon, such as Venus, atmospheric, optic, meteors, or planes. I am a professional, highly skilled professional astronomer. In addition, I have seen 3 green fireballs, which were unusual in behavior from normal green fireballs. I think that several reputable scientists are being unscientific in refusing to entertain the possibility of extraterrestrial origin and nature." End quotes. Yup, that's what Clyde W. Tombaugh himself said in 1956, mind you. Fast forward and back to tonight's skywatching. In July of 2015, the New Horizons spacecraft became the first Earth craft to sweep past Pluto. Its data required an Earth year to be returned, and scientists are still mining all that data, learning new things about Pluto. Images recently analyzed from the craft's cameras revealed what appear to be small, low-lying, isolated clouds, the first to be seen on the dwarf planet. Alan Stern, he's principal investigator for the New Horizons mission, commented thusly, quote, "If there are clouds, it would mean the weather on Pluto is even more complex than we imagined." End quotes. New Horizons is now headed for another trans-Neptunian object, by the way, a cold, classic Kuiper Belt object called MU69. It ought to get there in late 2018. And here's a tidbit about Pluto's orbit. Its orbit is highly inclined with respect to the ecliptic, the path of the Sun, Moon, and major planets. Pluto's orbit is also very eccentric. It's oblong. It carries this world from about 30 astronomical units, AUs, from the Sun at perihelion to 50 AUs from the Sun at aphelion. Surprisingly, perhaps, Pluto was actually closer to the Sun than was the planet Neptune from the years 1979 to 1999. EarthSky.org supplies a bunch of technical information here. You can find it later if you want to at UFOheadlinenews.com. Pluto, by the way, is locked into a 2.3 orbital resonance with Neptune. So here comes the bottom line. On October 25th and October 26th, 2017, the waxing crescent moon shines in the same part of the sky as tiny, fascinating Pluto. We have a fascinating story to pick up again. The threads we left off last week will weave into this week. The Linda Cortile abduction case, the Manhattan abduction case. So to get us to the state of mind and a New York state of UFO mind, let's go to Bainbridge, New York. It's an older sighting. The date of this sighting is 2005. The date is October 9th. Our witness, for some reason, didn't report it till 2017, on the same date, October 9th. MUFON has issued a case number. It's 87238. Here's the summary. Glowing silver shape comes straight towards us, very slowly, then straight back very quickly. Under the categories that include sighting specifics, we find a listed viewing distance of 101 to 500 feet. The altitude was 500 feet or less. Sighting duration 3 minutes. Object features none. Object flight path other, and the object shape is also described as other. Someone involved with this report sleuthed down the weather archives. The maximum temperature in 2005 over Bainbridge, New York, at the time of this event, was maximum temperature 51 degrees Fahrenheit, 11 degrees Celsius, dropping down to a minimum of 43 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 degrees Celsius. Maximum visibility, 6 miles, 10 kilometers, and the conditions indicate it was foggy and raining. Here is this remembered account. I was with a friend, and we had just gotten home from her family reunion. It was about 11 p.m., so it was quite dark out. Her dad walked inside ahead of us, and both of us then stopped and looked up. I don't know why we did that, because we didn't hear or see anything to make us turn around and look up. Above her barn was this bright light, like a sliver in the sky. I had no idea what it was. As we stared at it, it slowly, very slowly got bigger and bigger. It was hard to tell how far away this was in correlation to its size, because it glowed in the strangest way. It didn't blink, nor did it have lights that I could see, more like it was just made of light. The shape was like a smushed football, kind of like if it were horizontal and thinner. It seemed to me that it was right in front of us, right above us. It started out small above her barn, then got very large as it traveled straight towards us. And due to its coming straight towards us like that, it seemed that it grew in size. It didn't grow in size, perhaps. It could have been just the illusion. At any rate, it hovered in front of us for a little while, and after a minute or so, this thing zoomed straight backwards, so far that it disappeared. It was just too small to see anymore. It was as if this thing zoomed back and blinked out of existence. The speed with which it went backwards and how far away it got so quickly was like nothing I've ever seen before. While I watched this scene, I was awestruck. I didn't feel anything at all. I just watched this with no emotion. I'm a very scared and cautious person, but I just stood there and watched this with no feelings towards it whatsoever. Once it disappeared, my friend turned towards me and said, "Did you see that?" I replied, "Oh, thank God you saw it too." We both proceeded then to go inside and tell her father, and he said, "Oh, you crazy girls, you have quite the imaginations," which made me angry because I needed validation after such a sight. Well, then we went upstairs to bed. She just falls right asleep, my friend, before she even hits the pillow. I was up all night. I waited for the sun to rise before I could even close my eyes. I was scared to death to look out the windows, but also I was scared to not look out the windows. It was a very nerve-wracking night for me, plenty of hiding under the blankets. I was just too scared to move. Yup, just those crazy kids and those wild imaginations. And this could explain why our witness held off on reporting for so long. There, did you feel that ripple around you, that subtle shift in space-time, a mild disruption in the force field, perhaps? Well, it's Way Back Wednesday, part and parcel. We're going to pick up with part 3 of the Linda Cortile Manhattan abduction case. In a nutshell, November 30th, 1989, housewife and mother Linda Cortile, later to call herself Linda Napolitano for reasons unknown to this broadcaster, was abducted from her 12th-story Manhattan apartment bedroom window out into the night and up, seen with a couple of extraterrestrials, the classic gray shape, on either side of her, up and into a departing spacecraft. Who the witnesses were makes the case extraordinary. Author and artist Bud Hopkins, famous hypnotist and UFO researcher, made this case very well known. In fact, he called it the Manhattan abduction case, and it's an interesting read. Lots of elements in this, lots of people crying hoax. We take the story now in a slight divergence. Our excellent supplier of a treasure trove of information, our man in the high castle, from his secure and undisclosed location, provided us with this information, a possible link to President George Bush. Who better to provide presidential UFO information than Grant Cameron and his site called presidentialufo.com? And he writes, Of all the presidents that have been faced with the UFO problem, George Bush seemed on the surface to be the best qualified president to have been given the secret. He spent a year as Director of Central Intelligence, the head of the entire United States intelligence community for President Ford. Then, as DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, he was in charge of giving intelligence briefings to Jimmy Carter during his transition to the presidency in 1976. Who better to know the ultimate top secret about UFOs than the man the CIA named the headquarters compound in Langley, Virginia, the George Bush Center for Intelligence? The CIA spoke glowingly of him. Quote, CIA's relationship with Bush was undoubtedly the most productive it had enjoyed with any of the 9 presidents it served since the agency's founding in 1947. President Bush was uniquely and extraordinarily well informed, end quotes. The UFO incidents in the Bush presidency were few and far between. This lack of disclosure may have gone back to George Bush's term as head of the CIA for Gerald Ford. Bush had learned the reasons for keeping secrets and remained tight-lipped about the UFO situation while president. Part of the lack of UFO incidents was undoubtedly due to the fact that President Bush only served 1 term in the White House. The addition of Dan Quayle as vice president only added to the apparent weakness of the presidency, writes Cameron. Apparently, Grant Cameron contacted the Bush Library for response on this. They said only there was 1 UFO document in the entire presidential collection. Does this mean that the UFO phenomena went away during the Bush years, or that Bush was able to deflect all UFO paperwork to other agencies, such as the Air Force, NASA, or highly classified black budget programs set up specifically to deal with the UFO situation, away from those probing eyes of the public? And now here Grant Cameron weaves back into our narrative regarding Linda Cortile, now calling her Linda Napolitano. Perhaps one of the strangest presidential UFO stories comes from circumstances surrounding an abduction of a lady by the name of Linda Napolitano that occurred in November of 1989, and disclosures made about that case by Dr. Stephen Greer. In order to understand the story, one must review what Dr. Greer's worldview regarding extraterrestrial visitations is, and with the associated abduction phenomena. Dr. Greer has made it quite clear he does not agree with the interpretation of the abduction phenomena as it is written up by a number of researchers who have studied that very phenomena. This view, expressed by ufologists such as Bud Hopkins, contends that aliens are abducting humans as part of some sort of genetic program. Dr. Stephen Greer, on the other hand, believes that a renegade, quote, black budget, end quotes, group can explain almost all of these, quote, abductions, end quotes. Dr. Greer alleges this is done using deceptive psychological warfare on the American people. He maintains that the group doing this possesses the developed technology to make members of the public believe that evil aliens have abducted them, or that they have talked to God, for instance, or anything else they choose to have them believe. He said, quote, "We have advanced black budget covert projects that operate outside of any constitutional oversight that have taken extraterrestrial materials and biological matter and created scenarios using those to make it look like they are extraterrestrial events that are going on, which in fact they are not. They are 100% human in origin. For example, the grays that I know that exist are artificial biological life forms that are made out of a facility in New Mexico, a facility named Dulce, which is connected underground to Los Alamos," end quotes. Again, that's Grant Cameron quoting the words of Dr. Stephen Greer, who ends with this, quote, "There is an attempt, in my opinion, to export this perceived threat. Military spending in the world just hit $1 trillion. to grow it in the next millennia, you've got to have an enemy off planet. Instead of an evil empire being the Soviet Union, there has been an attempt to gradually indoctrinate and condition people to be afraid of and to hate everything extraterrestrial so that there could be a military justification. End quotes. Now, here's Grant Cameron again. The power to abduct is, according to Greer, the ultimate trump card to hold the president or anyone else in power from revealing the UFO secret. Here's what Stephen Greer said to the legendary radio hero Art Bell, quote, "It can be made very clear to them that if they don't, the public, play along, the trump card can be played," end quotes. Quick aside, gentle listeners, this article was written previous to the current administration. The word Trump is the original usage of that word. Here is Grant Cameron's nutshell observation regarding the incident in New York City, Linda Napolitano, quartile, and peripherally her son. On November 30th, 1989, an incident occurred in New York City involving Linda Napolitano and her son. She recalled being abducted from her 12th floor apartment building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in New York City. Bud Hopkins, a New York City UFO researcher who had worked with hundreds of abductees, investigated the case. During the course of that investigation, Hopkins learned that Linda had received correspondence from a man who claimed to have witnessed the abduction. The man claimed his car had stalled 2 blocks away and that he and 2 men with him had witnessed the whole event about 3:30 in the morning. This man, who wrote Linda and Hopkins about the event, turned out to be the United Nations Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuellar. Pérez de Cuellar was in New York City at the time, traveling from a heliport into the city with his 2 Secret Servicemen. Gentle listeners, we know these Secret Servicemen already as Richard and Dan. After further investigation, Bud Hopkins determined that Pérez de Cuellar was not a witness, but he had himself been abducted as well. This fact was later confirmed by Linda's son, who identified the Secretary General from 20 photographs of men shown to him by Bud Hopkins as the man who was with him and comforted him during the abduction. Bud Hopkins contacted Pérez de Cuellar in person about the letters he sent to Linda and himself, and de Cuellar did not deny his involvement. At the time, Hopkins declined to name Pérez de Cuellar in his book, the book that detailed the abduction, entitled Witnessed, the True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abductions. He said, quote, "I feel a great deal of pity for him," end quotes. Later, in 1996, under pressure from the Nova television show to make it public, Javier Pérez de Cuellar, then a private citizen, denied that he had been abducted. The next part of the story is provided again by Dr. Stephen Greer, who himself has briefed United Nations Secretary Generals about the UFO extraterrestrial intelligence situation. Greer, however, fully believed that the incident with the Secretary General was not an abduction, but a, quote, covert kidnapping, end quotes, of the Secretary General. Greer received his account of the incident from a head of state who was involved with Pérez de Cuellar at the time. This official described to Greer what had happened using these words, quote, "He was working with a number of other world leaders to come out with exactly what SETI is attempting to do now, and he was made to disappear, as it were, in a faked or a hoaxed abduction attempt. Then he was told on board the craft that he should cease and desist from any further attempt to bring this information out. If he and other leaders didn't, all of them would be abducted. Bud Hopkins thinks it was an abduction. It was not an abduction." End quotes. In an article Dr. Stephen Greer wrote detailing his view of the abduction phenomena, Again, he spoke of the de Cuellar abduction without mentioning Perez de Cuellar's name specifically. In the article, he added that the event had so panicked the Bush White House that the disclosure plans for the UFO secret, well, those plans were immediately called off. Here's what Dr. Stephen Greer wrote of that. Quote, specifically, in the alien abduction of a certain past major world leader, this was an orchestrated event by covert forces attempting to end a planned disclosure on this subject by this leader, the United States President, the head of the USSR, and others. A first-hand witness who is friends with this world leader and is himself a head of state has related the details of this abduction to me personally. It was an effective, if horrible, attempt to frighten these world leaders into ending their plans to disclose the UFO information to the world at the end of the Cold War. Both this world leader and the head of state and friend who related this to me did not know that this event was done by covert human forces. They themselves thought this to be an actual alien abduction. And the message offered to this world leader by these hoaxed aliens, quote, cease your plans to disclose our presence to the world, or we can and will abduct every world leader involved, end quotes. How convenient. This, I am told, blew up, quote, like an atomic bomb in the White House, end quotes. And all plans to effect a disclosure on the subject were ended forthwith and forever, end quotes. Now Grant Cameron goes into the other side, the rest of the story, perhaps, looking at it from a different perspective. Have to look at all the sides. He writes, in checking the Greer version of the de Cuellar abduction, a series of events were uncovered that indicated that the Greer story, no matter how bizarre it seems at first glance, might actually be true. Had there been a worldwide plan to release the UFO secret following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Cold War? Was there an effort by someone to stop it? So, Grant Cameron asks us to consider the following. Point 1. On the day of the de Cuellar abduction, George Bush left Washington for Malta and the first post-Cold War summit. Point 2. The evening of the abduction, only 3 hours before Linda Napolitano's 3 a.m. abduction, Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was meeting privately with George Bush at the White House. It seems Brian Mulroney had just returned from the Soviet Union and a meeting with Gorbachev. His purpose in meeting with Bush was to brief him about his meeting with Gorbachev. Point 3. Rumors have Brian Mulroney in New York City following his visit with George Bush. There were apparently 5 cars in that de Cuellar motorcade, and there is at least one rumor that has Mulroney in that motorcade. But Hopkins stated when asked he had never heard about the Canadian Prime Minister being in the motorcade. And point 4, there is information that the de Cuellar motorcade was heading for a heliport at Governor's Island. This island on the southernmost part of Manhattan is a United States Coast Guard authorized personnel-only complex. The secure complex was the site of the summit meeting held the year before with President Reagan and Gorbachev, along with President-elect Bush in attendance. A very many-layered story. We've only gotten through some of them. Next week we'll talk about either an uncanny coincidence or fiction that preceded this event. And let you, gentle listeners, decide. For now, we gotta roll because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network. Follow this broadcast at UFOheadlinenews.com. Take care of each other. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you tomorrow.